In this video, we're going to cover the difference between free chlorine, combined chlorine, and total chlorine. So to start off with, let's talk about free chlorine. This is measured with a DPD1 test tablet, and free chlorine, think about it as chlorine that's free and available and ready to act as a biocide. So you need to make sure that you've got enough free chlorine in your pool to be able to kill all the bacteria and bugs and germs and all that sort of stuff. So it's obviously very important, but what happens is, because of bathers coming in to the pool and they're going to introduce things like sweat, urine, etc., that type of thing. What happens with all this stuff that bathers introduce, this chemical pollution? It turns into something called ammonia. So it's almost inevitable, really, that there's going to be ammonia being introduced into a swimming pool. And what will happen is the ammonia and the free chlorine will start to react with each other, start to combine, and that produces something called chloramines. But what we tend to do is just call it combined chlorine. And think of all the negative things associated with chlorine. You know, it makes your eyes sting, affects your skin, can affect your respiratory system as well if you're inhaling the the water evaporates from the pool, becomes airborne, and you're inhaling that. Can also affect the mucous membranes. All the negative things, really, that people tend to associate with chlorine, it's actually combined chlorine that's responsible for that. Another negative thing about combined chlorine is that it does not disinfect. It's got no disinfectant properties at all. It's free chlorine that disinfects, not combined chlorine. And then there's something called total chlorine. Now, what total chlorine is, you might have guessed already, it's basically the free chlorine and the combined chlorine. And why would you need to know the total chlorine? Well, there's a test that you can do on free chlorine and total chlorine, but there isn't a tablet test for combined chlorine. So you have to work out what the free chlorine is, then work out what the total chlorine is to allow you to work out what the combined chlorine is. So, for example, you test the free chlorine with a DPD1 tablet, and let's say you get a reading of 1.5 parts per million for the free chlorine, and then you go on to test total chlorine with a DPD3 tablet, and what you'll might find is, for example, that you have a total chlorine reading of 2. What that would allow you then to do is work out that you've got 0.5 parts per million or milligrams per litre. It's the same thing, but by calculating what the total chlorine is and then working out how much of that total is in the form of free chlorine, then the remainder has got to be in the form of combined chlorine. Now, you need to know what the combined chlorine is because you need to control it. Think of combined chlorine as a byproduct, a somewhat unwanted byproduct, but it's a byproduct of the chlorination process that has got no value, but you just kind of have to put up with the fact that that's what happens with chlorine. But you don't want the combined chlorine levels to rise too high. So you need to keep the combined chlorine at certainly less than 1. Got to keep it less than 1 part per million. But if it happens to be lower, you've got to go less than half of the free. So it's less than 1 or less than half of the free. So let's look at the free chlorine is 1.5. So half of 1.5 is 0.75. Okay, so that's going to be lower obviously than 1. So that would be the target, to keep it less than 0.75, which, as you can see in the example here, it is. It's being controlled. It is accumulating, but it's not being allowed to accumulate past those limits, which indicates that the pool is successfully controlling the build-up of combined chlorine. Because what will tend to happen is free chlorine it will go through that process of becoming combined chlorine. So if you just keep chucking more and more free chlorine in, if there's ammonia in the pool, then that free chlorine is going to combine with that ammonia, and you're going to end up with elevated levels of combined chlorine, not necessarily free chlorine. But if you can control the build-up of ammonia, and a good way of doing that is making sure everyone takes pre-swim showers, because that way you kind of make sure that the things that create ammonia, the sweat and the urine, sort of never get into the pool. So you prevent or severely curtail the production of ammonia in the first place. Another way of controlling the build-up of ammonia is making sure that you're adding plenty of fresh water into the pool. So that has the effect of diluting out the ammonia. And as long as you're doing that, when you end up adding free chlorine, there'll only be a limited amount of ammonia to combine with, so then you're not going to allow the combined chlorine levels to accumulate to high levels. Because what you'll end up with if combined chlorine accumulates to high levels is a very low quality standard of pool water. It'll be making people's eyes sting. The water will look possibly discoloured. And what it can also do, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but combined chlorine is also what gives you that chlorine smell in a swimming pool. It's not free chlorine that does that, it's combined chlorine. So in summary then, combined chlorine is a byproduct of the chlorination process. It's created via a combination of ammonia and free chlorine. The ammonia comes from bathers in the form of sweat, urine and other chemicals that bathers are bringing in with them. You've got to control combined chlorine, keep it as low as possible. If you can get it down to 0, then that should certainly be a goal worth aiming for. But in any case, the maximum permissible levels of combined chlorine is less than 1 or less than half of what the free chlorine is, whichever of those two things is lower.